7 small escorts stood between Admiral Takeo Kurita and 6 American carriers. One of the ships coming at them was Yamato. If you stay, you die under guns you cannot answer. If you turn in, you might buy minutes. That is the decision at Samar. In the next few minutes, you will see why Taffy 3 should have been destroyed, who struck first, and why Kurita turned away from ships he outweighed so completely. This matters because modern war still punishes people the same way. Not with perfect plans, with 30 seconds, with bad information, with cold metal under your hands and alarm bells cutting through wet morning air. Would you have turned toward the gunfire? Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague's escort carriers were not built for this. They were slow, thin-skinned, crowded with aircraft, fuel, and men. Behind them lay the invasion off Leyte, and behind that, the entire American effort to hold the Philippines. If Kurita broke the screen, these carriers would not fight a proper duel. They would burn. You can hear the first heavy shells before you fully see where they came from. A deep delayed thud, followed by the scream overhead, and white columns of water smashing up around the formation. The promise here is simple. We will answer 2 things quickly: why Kurita appeared off Samar at all, and why destroyers with 5-inch guns charged battleships instead of running. To understand that morning, you have to go back into the night. The wider battle was Leyte Gulf. American forces were landing in the Philippines. The Japanese response was complex, desperate, and spread across multiple seas. Kurita's center force had already taken punishment in the Sibuyan's Sea. Musashi was gone. Many American commanders believed the threat had been broken. It had not. During the night of the 24th October 1945, Kurita pushed through San Bernardino Strait and entered the open water east of Samar. That was the hinge. Taffy 3 expected aircraft, submarines, maybe raids. Not a line of heavy ships coming out of rain squalls at dawn. Salt wind cut across open bridges. Visibility shifted by the minute. Dark hulls appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. The enemy was not approaching. He was already there. Task Unit 77.4.3 sounded larger than it was. The heart of it was 6 escort carriers: Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkun Bay, and Gambier Bay. In front of them were 3 destroyers: USS Johnston, USS Hull, USS Heermann, and 4 destroyers escorts, including USS Samuel B. Roberts. These were not fleet duelists, they were screens. Aircraft ferries with a job. Small ships with thin hulls, limited ammunition, and guns that were never meant to settle arguments with Yamato, Nagato, Haruna, and Congo. Men ran on wet decks that smelled of oil, cordite, and sea salt. The carriers were already turning to escape, making smoke, launching anything that could fly. What came out of the mist was not just larger. It belonged to a different category of war. Kurita's force carried enough weight to end the fight quickly. Yamato alone mounted 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever fitted to a battleship. With her came Nagato, Haruna, Congo, heavy cruisers like Chokai and Chikuma, and destroyers screening the advance. When those ships found the range, the sea did not splash. It erupted. Great white pillars climbed beside the American formation, and the shock shook light hulls from a distance. You know, in that moment, that speed will not save you for long. Armor will not save you at all. So what do you do when your force cannot win by firepower, cannot outrun the enemy, and cannot leave the ships behind you? That was the real shape of the problem. Not courage in the abstract, a calculation made in wet air and panic. The first clear answer came from Commander Ernest E. Evans of USS Johnston. He did not wait for a perfect order. He turned in. Johnston accelerated, laid smoke, and charged toward ships that could erase her with one good salvo. This is where the hook pays off. Why did the weak attack the strong? Because standing still meant the carriers behind them would die in sequence, one after another, with almost no chance to answer. Evans chose disruption over survival. On Johnston's bridge, Engines rose to a hard metallic scream. The deck heeled underfoot. Splinters and paint flakes shook loose as near misses threw spray across the guns. He was not trying to sink a battle line with one destroyer. He was trying to break its rhythm. Sometimes that is the only weapon left. Smoke became a weapon. So did weather. Johnston's screens, mixed with rain squalls and the low morning light, turned a clean firing problem into something confused and human. Kurita's ships did not see a neat diagram. They saw targets flicker through gray veils, then disappear. American 5-inch guns snapped out a faster, flatter rhythm than the deep concussion of heavy naval artillery, and that difference mattered. Small ships could not overpower a battleship. They could blind a formation, force hesitation, and make every captain wonder whether the next shadow carried torpedoes. Eyes burned in oily smoke. Men coughed black grit. Rangefinders lost clean lines. The battle at Samar did not begin with destruction alone. It began with perception failing under pressure. Once that happened, superior firepower had to work through fear and uncertainty like everyone else. Johnston was hit hard early. Shellfire wrecked systems, cut steam, and opened the ship to smoke and heat. Evans kept fighting. This is the part that can sound like legend if told carelessly. So keep it plain. A damaged destroyer stayed between heavy cruisers and the carriers, and continued firing, duffering, and maneuvering under punishment that should have ended the engagement. Reports credit Johnston with helping force Japanese ships to sheer away, throw off aim, and react to torpedo threats. You can hear the interior of the ship now. Shrill phones shouted bearing, the hammering rattle of metal under stress. Compartments grew hot enough to feel like a furnace. Paint blistered. Salt water mixed with the smell of burned wiring. This was no longer only a screen action. It was time being purchased with a hull. Johnston was not alone for long. USS Hull and USS Heermann also turned toward the Japanese line. That changed the scale of the problem for Kurita. One destroyer is a hazard. Several attacking from different angles become a series of interruptions that never stop. Torpedo tracks force heavy ships to turn. Each turn breaks formation. Each broken formation complicates gunnery. Rain and smoke do the rest. The American ships were still outmatched. Nothing about that changed. But the Japanese could no longer apply their strength as if this were a firing exercise. Orders came sharp over bridge speakers. Helms answered with violent swings. Spray slapped across gun shields. What looks impossible in calm water becomes barely possible in chaos. And chaos, that morning, favored the smaller force for just long enough. Then came USS Samuel B. Roberts, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland. She was a destroyer escort, smaller than the destroyers already charging in. She was not supposed to fight like this. She did anyway. Roberts pushed to flank speed, burning through her limits to close the range and attack a vastly stronger enemy with 5-inch fire and torpedoes. Sailors later called her the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. The phrase survives because the scene demanded it. You can picture it clearly. A small gray ship, pounding through spray, bow lifting, gun flashes sharp in the rain, shell splinters whining past open stations. But awe has to stay tied to cost. Every minute Roberts stayed in the fight, the odds worsened for the men on her decks. Copeland knew that. He went in anyway. The carriers behind them were not idle. Planes launched with whatever they had, and sometimes with almost nothing useful for heavy surface targets. Pilots from Gambier Bay, White Plains, and the other escort carriers attacked anyway. Some carried depth charges. Some had machine guns. Some made dry runs simply to harass, distract, and force Japanese crews to keep looking up as well as ahead. That matters more than it sounds. A formation under attack from sea and air in bad visibility starts solving too many problems at once. Fuel fumes hung over the escort decks. Propellers bit wet air. Men waved aircraft off with urgency that bordered on panic. What would you do with an airplane loaded for the wrong war, staring down battleships? At Samar, even inadequacy became pressure if applied without pause. There is one image Samar keeps returning to. Gambier Bay trying to run. Johnston limping nearby, smoke streaming low over the water. Japanese shells walking closer, then landing. Men on exposed mounts bracing as the next impact throws warm fragments and cold spray together across the deck. One carrier's stern wake widens as she strains for every knot she does not have. A destroyer crosses the frame, firing into something too large for the eye to accept. This is the battle reduced to one scene. Not speeches, not symbol. Just vessels built for different purposes, trapped in the same morning. Rear Admiral Sprague kept trying to save his carriers. Kurita kept pressing, then hesitating, then pressing again through an increasingly uncertain picture. If you were on that bridge, what would you trust more? Your guns, or what you thought you were seeing? The survival of Taffy 3 has a price attached to names. USS Johnston was lost. USS Hull was lost. USS Samuel B. Roberts was lost. USS Gambier Bay went down, the only American carrier sunk by enemy surface gunfire during the war. Commander Ernest E. Evans did not survive. Many others did not either. Water closed over burning steel and men already cut by splinters and exhaust heat. Some drifted for hours, some for far longer. This is the point where admiration has to slow down and look directly at consequence. A last stand is easier to praise from a warm room than from an oil-slick sea. They bought time. They did not escape payment for it, and yet the measure remains. Small ships, badly placed, chose to move toward the fire and change the result. The record keeps this. The 25 October 1944, off Samar. The record keeps this. 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts, 6 escort carriers. The record keeps this. Johnston, Hull, Samuel B. Roberts, and Gambier Bay were lost. What no record keeps, the exact sound of a man's breathing before he ordered flank speed into battleship fire. What no record keeps, whose hands shook while loading the next round on a wet deck that smelled of smoke and fuel. Records preserve outcomes. They do not preserve the private distance between fear and action. That is true here, and it is why these battles stay alive. Not because the numbers are unclear. Because the numbers are clear, and still somehow too small for what had to be done.